Hey everyone, welcome to Liberty Speaks. I'm Dr. Irene Mavrikakis, and my co-host is Brittany Cozen. Hey Brittany, how are you?
Good. How are you, Irene?
I'm great. We are super excited to have our next guest on to talk with us about everything libertarian and everything running for U.S. Senate. So we have John Thomas. He's running for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania as, of course, a libertarian. And we're so happy to have you. So welcome, John Thomas. How are you? And how's the campaign going?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here. I really look forward to speaking to your audience and sharing a little bit about me. Campaign's really going well. I've really been enjoying my time out on the trail, getting to meet folks all across Pennsylvania. I think our message really is resonating with folks right now. They're seeing how a lot of the big government policies are affecting their life. And they're ready for some change. They're ready to send a message to the establishment that what's going on is not acceptable. And I'm there to be their voice, to help them to help them make that announcement that they're ready for a change.
Great. So I know a little bit about you. I know that you're an educator for a long time. And I think that it is super important that the person running for U.S. Senate can speak correct grammatical English and has the capability of understanding complex topics. So I think that we have to have leaders that are educated and well-spoken, which you are, of course. So I have a question. Where is this pathway to libertarianism for you? So you were most people who are libertarian were not born libertarian. So what's your journey?
My origin story. My origin story kind of begins where a lot of libertarians' origin stories begin. I think a lot of almost every libertarian I talked to has an origin story that tends to either begin with Ayn Rand or Ron Paul. And my origin story begins with Ayn Rand. Actually, I was substitute teaching at a local school here in my area, and it was for an English class, and they were reading Anthem, which is Ayn Rand's like novelette. It's a real short read. And I sat there and I was like, well, the kids are doing silent reading. I'll join them in their silent reading. And I sat there and read that whole book that day and thought, this is very interesting. I'm going to look into it a little bit more. And I ended up reading every Ayn Rand book, including all of her fiction and nonfiction, except for the Romantic Manifesto. I still haven't read that one. I probably should read that one so that whenever I say I've read every one of her books, I don't need to put that exemption in there, even if that's the only reason I read it. It's just to make the story go a little bit quicker. So I read all of her books. But that was around the same time that Ron Paul was doing his 2000. It was around 2007. So Ron Paul was just getting started with his 2008 run, and I started following Ron Paul as well. So I kind of came in the party with the same pathway a lot of people do, but I took both pathways. I consider myself more of a Ron Paul libertarian than an Ayn Rand libertarian, but I respect both of them immensely. Both of them help to get me to where I am, and so both of my origin stories run through that. I think that really the moment I started calling myself a libertarian was after the one Republican debate with Ron Paul in it, where Ron Paul talked about the blowback effect of American foreign policy and got booed. And he just stood there stoically and said, I don't care if you're booing me. I'm going to stand here and tell you the truth. And to me, that was just a sign that this is a movement with principles, and I wanted to be in a movement with principles.
Yeah, that's a great story. It's funny that you were substitute teaching and you actually learned something while you were substitute teaching, which is interesting. Is your, a lot of us don't live in libertarian families, like your brothers, fathers, sisters, mothers. Are you the current human or?
Yeah, my brother, my little brother is a very libertarian leaning. My nephew is actually a libertarian. As a matter of fact, my nephew, who lives like 2 hours away from me, was working for a company that shipped him to Germany for some training, and he's sitting in Germany. He sends me a text, and he says, "Look who I'm hanging out with," and it's one of my local affiliates, fellow libertarians. And I was like, first, why are you guys hanging out together in Germany? Second, how did you both know that you had a mutual connection in me, of all people? And it was libertarianism. Like they both said, "Hey, I'm a libertarian," and the other one said, "I'm a libertarian." And somehow it came, "Do you know John Thomas?" Both of them were like, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do." So my nephew is a libertarian, but my family, for the most part, is. Was more on the neoconservative kind of. Well, my dad was more of a classical conservative. My mom was probably more of a neoconservative. But today, I think that my dad passed away in 2016, but my mom's starting to come around some. So
Yeah, sorry about the loss of your dad. Yeah, so that's super interesting. So tell us a little bit about, running as a libertarian and what's the deal with your competitors in this U.S. Senate race.
Well, running as a libertarian, it's frustrating to a degree because it's so hard to get any media attention, any even mentions in the polls, anything like that. It's very hard to get as a libertarian, but it's also there's also a degree of freedom you get as running as a libertarian because nobody expects you to win. So it's not like I need to sacrifice any of my values for a vote because nobody's expecting me to win anyways. Whereas if it were neck and neck between me and McCormick or me and Bob Casey, maybe I'd be like, oh, maybe I do need to roll back the liberty speak a little bit so I can win over these votes. But nope, I can be as pure as I want to be, as pure as a Ron Paul or Ayn Rand libertarian ought to be, and just stay true to my principles, stay true to the non-aggression principle without having to worry about winning over this vote or that vote, because there is a remnant out there. Ron Paul used to talk about the remnant. You might be on your social media accounts and think, why doesn't anybody get it? Like, it seems so obvious to me, but I'm looking at social media. It seems like nobody gets it. Everyone thinks, oh, if we just have the right people running this massive government, everything's going to be fine. But there's a remnant out there who does get it. And they're looking for a way to voice that idea that, yes, we get it. It's not merely who's running this monstrosity. It's the monstrosity itself that we need to take down. And so reaching that remnant requires being principled. But sometimes people are afraid to be principled if they're worried about losing this vote or that vote in a close race. The fact that I'm running as a libertarian in a minor party helps me not to have to worry about that. So you asked about the two people who I'm running against, the two major party candidates who I'm running against. There are other candidates who are on the ballot as well. But the major party candidates that I'm running against one is Bob Casey. And Bob Casey is a name that is so familiar to Pennsylvanians. Bob Casey's dad was named Bob Casey, so he's Bob Casey Jr. And his dad was a very popular governor in the 90s. So Bob Casey is a legacy political family. So when Bob Casey first ran for Senate, the younger Bob Casey, the Bob Casey I'm running against, whenever he first ran for Senate in 2008, I think was when he first ran. He ran as somebody who was kind of a moderate. In fact, his dad was kind of a moderate. His dad was known as like a pro-life Democrat. He was like kind of moderate on some issues, like people you don't see today. And he was kind of running as a moderate. He complained about Rick Santorum, who he was running against, voting 97% of the time with the Republicans. And he was saying Rick Santorum is not representative of the Pennsylvanians, because Pennsylvanians have a diversity of views, and he is just a party line vote every single time. Well, since Bob Casey's been elected, Bob Casey votes with Democrats 98% of the time. So he's actually more consistently partisan than the guy he ran against, saying you're too partisan. So
I'm shocked by that. I'm shocked.
Imagine that, right?
Shocking.
So that's the Democrat. He also, like, I don't think anybody can name like a Casey piece of legislation. Like, he's just a guy who's up there to rubber stamp everything that the Democrats want. So that's Bob Casey. And then the Republican I'm running against is Dave McCormick, who isn't really from Pennsylvania. He's lived in Connecticut for the last, I don't know how many years. And I don't know what is up with the Pennsylvania Republican Party. Some people think that they're just like a controlled opposition. Like, they just run people so that people have the idea that they had a choice, whenever really they're just like, hey, we're all about just making sure the Democrats win. Maybe that's the case, but this is 2 elections in a row where the Republicans are running somebody who is not even from Pennsylvania. 2 years ago, they ran Dr. Oz against John Fetterman. And you could probably pick up a phone book, just run your finger down a list of Republicans and pick somebody who was from Pennsylvania, and that Republican would have been able to beat John Fetterman. But instead, they chose to run somebody from New Jersey.
Oh, my God.
And Pennsylvanians don't, I mean, New Jersey isn't a very popular state anywhere, but even in New Jersey, New Jerseyans don't like New Jerseyans. So that was a very unpopular thing to do. So, of course, Fetterman did win that. And the Republicans absolutely did not learn their lesson, and this year nominated somebody who is from Connecticut. But if the worst thing about McCormick was the fact that he was from Connecticut, that would be much better than where we are right now. McCormick is a neocon's neocon. He is a very war-hungry person. He even suggested that America needs to invade Mexico. He thinks that America's solution for the immigration problem and the drug problem is a war with Mexico. Now, I don't know if he studied any international history, but if you want to create an immigration crisis, war is a great way to do it, because war displaces people. It makes them want to leave where they're at and seek asylum somewhere else. So if he's concerned about an immigration crisis, you don't want a war with Mexico. But yeah, he was part of the George W. Bush administration. He worked as the Undersecretary of the Treasury, responsible for international affairs. And, you know, if there's one thing that might be worse than being part of the Treasury Department under George W. Bush, whenever we had the TARP bailouts and we had the housing boom and bust and we had all that chaos with our American monetary system, there's one thing that would be worse than being part of the Treasury Department under him, would be working in international affairs under George W. Bush, because we had the disastrous Iraqi war, we had a disaster in Afghanistan, and McCormick, is actually at the intersection of where Treasury and International Affairs met under the George W. Bush administration. He is an absolute nightmare of a candidate. So those are the two major party options that I'm running against this year for United States Senate.
Wow. That's
So
so much.
I have a couple questions since we're on with your on the topic of your opponents. So one of them I have is, what do you think about McCormick mistakenly using Philadelphia, Mississippi's police stuff with a shooting instead of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on his social media?
Yeah, I think that it might be helpful for McCormick to maybe live in Pennsylvania a little bit longer, so he knows what cities are here in Pennsylvania and which ones are in Mississippi. That was absolutely hilarious. I guess it's an understandable mistake if you don't read the article, but it's a good idea. Just in general, folks out there, before you share something on social media, click on the link and read the article, get a little bit of a grounding for it. But yeah, it was because of the fact that he's not from Pennsylvania, and then he shares something about the wrong Philadelphia, was just a glorious mistake. I literally laughed out loud whenever I saw that.
Yeah, so I definitely think if he was from Pennsylvania, I think he would have noticed, just looking at the picture, that it is not a Philadelphia police vehicle.
You can't
live here. You don't know what our vehicles look like, so you wouldn't be familiar with it. But I'm from Southeast PA, so I definitely know what Philadelphia police vehicle look like.
Yeah, and you can't get more opposite in culture than Southeast Pennsylvania and Mississippi. These are very culturally distinct places.
Yes, very
That's
different.
Great.
Also, one other thing, because you were mentioning McCormick being involved in international affairs and stuff like that. His hedge fund handles a lot of accounts with China. What do you think that's something that kind of should disqualify him from a position in the U.S. Senate, just with how our political climate is, being that he has so many connections to some pretty controversial international connections?
It's interesting. I don't think it should legally disqualify him, but I think that voters need to consider that, especially the fact that he's being such a hawk against China right now. It was kind of like Trump with Russia. Trump was very hawkish with Russia during his presidency, and I think that it was almost in response to people said that he was colluding with Russia, and he said, "Oh, well, to prove I'm not, I'll walk right up to the edge of nuclear war with Russia." And I think McCormick might be in the same situation where he's like, to prove I'm not just a shill for the Chinese, off of whom I made millions and millions of dollars selling. He had the largest foreign-owned hedge fund in China. So he made millions off of the Chinese. But now he's like, actually, whenever I first started running, I went to his website to see what he was running on. And every policy position he had listed at that point, he's updated it since then. But every policy position was, we need to do this to China. We need to do this to China. It was all China phobia left and right. It was so I think that was a way of him overcompensating for the fact that he has made millions off of China. So he wants to look like he's kind of hawkish on China, which it kind of makes me feel like he's dishonest. Like he just won't own what he's done. He also invested money into the Chinese organization that first made synthetic fentanyl. So and now he's very hawkish on fentanyl as well. It's like, oh well, you kind of invested in it. But yeah, people need to be aware of the investments that he's made.
So you did mention kind of how when you first started, you were looking into his site. What kind of got you started and made you decide to run for U.S. Senate? Tell us the Senate origin story. If we saw about your Libertarian origin story, what's your U.S. Senate origin story?
Yeah, well, I really wasn't planning on running for United States Senate. Back in the 1800s, it was kind of people weren't supposed to seek elective office. It was kind of like it was seen kind of as arrogant if you would go out and seek elective office. It was almost supposed to be you were dragged into it. It was like I don't really want this, but if it means serving my country, I'll do it type thing. Well, and a lot of sometimes that was honest, sometimes it was just them playing that game. For me, that's kind of how it went. Like I went to the Libertarian convention this year and was not planning on running for any office whatsoever, not even an internal party office. I didn't even pack a tie with me for the event. They always do professional photos there. And if you're going to run for office, you bring a tie and a nice suit coat. I didn't bring any of that because I wasn't planning on running for anything. But a couple guys came up to me and they asked me if I would consider running. And my first answer was, this isn't something you do without asking your wife first. Like, if you're going to run for a statewide office, you better get the okay from the wife, because it's going to mean that I'm out of the house a lot more. I'm not able to help around the house. I'm not able to be there for emotional support for my wife a lot of times. So I had to get her blessing before I would go on. And they were like, well, you've got a phone. She's got a phone. Why don't you make this happen? So I was like, all right, I'll check in with her. So I did. And my wife gave her blessing. And then I was like, to these guys, I was like, why don't any of you guys run instead of making me run? Like, well, why don't you guys run? And they were like, well, none of us are over the age of 30. And the Constitution does require that senators be at least 30 years of age. So I was like, well, I can't talk you out of being in your 20s. Like, there's only one way to get you past that point. And it's not, I can't convince you to be 30 years old. So at that point, it was like, okay, I guess I will run. But even then, I didn't think that I was going to win the nomination, because there was already a pretty good Senate candidate running. Eric Gearhart ran 2 years ago, and he was running again. And Eric did a really good job by Libertarian standards. As a matter of fact, he secured us minor party status in a non-presidential year, which is, I think, the first time that's ever happened for the Libertarians. He still had yeah, he still had quite the financial war chest for him. So I thought, well, I'll run just to make these younger people happy that there's an alternative out there, and that'll be that. Like, that'll be the end of it. Eric's a good candidate. He's a good guy. He'll probably get the nomination. And then we had a little debate that day, and after the debate, I got like 60-some% of the vote, and ended up getting the nomination. I was very surprised by that. I'm honored that the Libertarian Party chose to have me be their voice for the state of Pennsylvania for this year. And I just appreciate the opportunity, and I have appreciated the experience that I've gotten running the statewide campaign.
So you have more, Britt?
I have one more right now. I'm on a roll tonight. What are just some key points from your platform that you kind of want our viewers to either look more into on your site, or just kind of plant those seeds for them?
The main thing that I like to hit on are, one is the fact that we're sending American resources all throughout the world. Americans are suffering as we're sending resources to countries on virtually every continent. And the way that we do that is by printing more money, because neither the Republicans or Democrats want to directly raise taxes. Even they'll talk about some, like, raising taxes on the billionaires here or there, but you can't tax the billionaires enough to get the billions of dollars that they want to send to these foreign regimes. So they can't tax that money directly. So the way that they do it is they just print the money. They just use the Federal Reserve to manipulate interest rates so they can lend the money, oftentimes to themselves, and then which is essentially printing the money out of thin air. And what that does is that makes the value of what you have worth less. So the more money that's printed, your money becomes worth a little bit less, until it's entirely worthless. So that's what's happening to our inflation. That's why we're seeing the inflation that we have. Bob Casey likes to create these made up words like greedflation and streamflation and shrinkflation, and he has all these different inflations, which are just a word for inflation. And it's because of what they're doing. It's not because companies were generous for years and years and years, and then suddenly in the last 5 years decide to be greedy and raise their prices. That's not how it works. Like if they could have made money 10 years ago by raising their prices to the levels that they are now, they would have done that, but they couldn't. The reason that all these companies can make money at the same time by raising their prices is because people have more, or the economy has more money flowing through it. And that allows that to happen. And it allows them to make enormous profits off of it as well. So that's why Casey says it's greedflation. They're making more profits. Well, the reason they're able to make more profits by raising their prices is because you're printing more money. So if we rein in the warfare state, then we can start reining back the money printing. So, and these are issues that resonate with Pennsylvania voters. Pennsylvanians are exhausted of the war, of wars. Like I'm 46 years old. So over half of my lifetime was after 9/11. I'm doing the math right. Close to half my lifetime was after 9/11, but almost right at that point. And it was like continuous war. People who are younger than me, it was over half their lifetime. The America's in war. Mm-hmm. There are people of voting age who were born after 9/11. And so it's been this war on terror has been going nonstop for them. People are exhausted and they're ready for some change. And I'm hearing that across Pennsylvania while I'm out talking to people.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. I'm a 91 baby. So yes, most of my life is some level of war. Between Desert Storm and on.
Yeah, well, you were born during Desert Storm then, right? Like Desert Storm was what, 90, 91, 80, 90, 91? Yeah.
Yeah. Toward the tail end.
All right, you young whippersnappers. I'm the old one. I was born in 1967. And 9/11 happened when I had already had children. And it was pretty wild. Okay, we're going to do a hypothetical situation, okay? So I'm in an elevator with you in Pennsylvania, but I'm not me. I am this really wealthy political operative that has a huge amount of influence, in particular with independent-leaning voters. And I want to consider helping you win the U.S. Senate. But I need to know, what would you actually do if we got you elected in the U.S. Senate? Who would you work with? How would you do it to make life better for Pennsylvanians and Americans? Like, why should I roll my dice with you? Because I'm kind of like a cranky old billionaire and I'm kind of sick of the duopoly myself. So you got, 5 to 10 minutes in the elevator in a 300,000 story building. So,
I was going to say, this is a tall building.
That's right. 300,000 stories. Or you're stuck. Push the damn button, all right? So
all right.
So tell me why I should do all this work for you and give you my $1 billion.
Well, right now the Senate is very evenly split, and after this election, it's going to remain very evenly split between the Republicans and the Democrats. So we're looking at a situation where if I am the Pennsylvania senator, Democrats would lose a seat there. Republicans would not gain that seat. It would be a Libertarian seat. We're looking at a situation where it might be a 49-1 split in the Senate. In that situation, that one is the most powerful senator. So if that one is an independent voice, not somebody who is going to caucus with the Democrats 99% of the time, like some of our quote independents in the Senate are, but somebody who truly is an independent and somebody who is willing to speak up for small government, for rolling back the size of the state, so that whenever I'm gone, assuming I'm elected, I'm not going to stay in the Senate forever. It's not going to happen. So at some point, it may go back to Democrats and Republicans again. And I want the reins that they have to be over a much smaller government. So roll that back, use that incredible power that one independent voice in the Senate would have to just keep rolling back the size of the state. So whenever the two parties are arguing back and forth over their legislation, both of them will recognize we need that one. We need that one along with us. So I would be able to use that influence to be like, oh, you want me to go along with you? Tell me where we're going to roll back. Tell me where we're going to cut the size of the government. If you want to spend $10 here, show me where we can cut $30 out, because I'm not going to go along with it if we're growing the size of the government. And all the senators on the Hill are going to know that those are the rules I play by, that I am not going to vote for anything that's going to increase the size of the government. And they're going to know that this is the game we need to play. And if we want to win, we need John's vote. And the only way we get John's vote is by being willing to cut the size of the government. So you can go to votejohnthomas.com and make that very large donation. Actually, you can only donate, I think, like $3,000 or something from that site. But you could set up your PAC and set up those billions of dollars through that PAC donation. And I think we're approaching the 3,000th floor right now.
That's great. That's great. I'm going to set up that super PAC. Let's get you elected. So let me ask you a question. I'm going to pretend I'm not a libertarian. Well, I wasn't. So we're getting off the elevator. How does rolling back government make the lives of Pennsylvanians and Americans better?
Well, Pennsylvanians are some of the most creative and resilient people on earth, and we can manage things pretty well. You see this in Libertarian Pennsylvania communities across the state, where people are engaged in private business, where people are engaged in community service, where people are engaged in family atmospheres or in church atmospheres. You see people getting along, you see people accomplishing things, you see people doing great things. And when you see people who are complaining a lot, it's normally about the government. It's about how the government is making things worse, or they have to go through the government for this thing. I need this thing, and right now the government's providing it, and it's frustrating. I need to go to the DMV to get this. Renew my license. I need to drive on this road that's full of potholes. I need to navigate Medicare, because that's the only way I can afford medicine at this point, is to be on Medicare, and it's a nightmare. Like, the more the government is involved in these things, just think of your own life. Like, think of those areas of your life where the government is not involved, versus those areas where you have to navigate government, and which is the most stressful for most of us, it's those areas of our lives where we need to navigate government. We have entire departments for companies that are dedicated to just dotting the I's and crossing the T's on government paperwork. So this is costing Pennsylvanians money. Whenever we're expending resources on just making sure that legalese is there, that bureaucrats are happy, that's money that's not being spent on additional employees at companies. That's money that's not being spent on pay raises for employees at companies. That's costing Pennsylvanians money. So the more we roll back the regulatory state, the more we roll back the spending of the state so that taxes are lower, the more Pennsylvanians have to solve their own problems. And I'm not saying that this is going to be all sunshines and lollipops and there are going to be no problems. But Pennsylvanians are equipped to solve their own problems whenever they can keep their own paychecks, when they can develop their own relationships in their communities, and whenever they can come together in freedom and not be regulated away from solving those problems.
Sounds good to me.
All right, write that check. Billionaire Mav.
A billionaire, man.
Billionaire. Okay.
Quintupleable. I don't even know. So do you want to give us maybe the pie in the sky bill, if you could wave a magic wand in the Senate once you're elected, and the pragmatic, I think I can get this bill done, if you were in the Senate?
Yeah, pie in the sky bill would be probably ending the Fed. That would automatically rein in so much of the government, just ending the Fed. It's not a constitutional branch of government anyways. It's not even, it's like half government, half private. It's really a fascist institution if you go with like Mussolini's definition of what fascism is, where you have a mixture of the corporate oligarchies with the government working together. That's what the Fed is. So if I had a magic wand and they're like, you have $100 in political capital, and it's going to cost you $99.99 of political capital to end the Fed, would you do it? I'd be like, yes, here's all my political capital. We're going to just end the Fed. More practical things, I think, as I was saying earlier, just the way of being that one voice versus whenever it's a split 50-50, basic, or 50-49-1, just being able to say, hey, if you want my support for anything, you're going to have to pair it with some scaling back of the government. So it might mean minor cuts here and minor cuts there, but over a 6-year period, if that's happening all the time, then we could actually see the size of the government decrease. Because right now, the arguments between normally the Democrats saying we want to increase the government by this much, and Republicans are like, we want to increase the government by not quite that much. Like, they're both about increasing the size of the government. It's just how much they're increasing it by. So if we could get them to actually be willing to decrease the size of the government, that would be a huge win for the Pennsylvania people.
Yeah, I agree completely. So how do people get involved with your campaign? How do they reach you? What do you need help with? Give us some more information. I'm super grateful to have you on. I think you're a great candidate and you represent libertarian principles wonderfully. And maybe final thoughts on your road to liberty, election success potentially.
So you can find me on votejohnthomas.com. That's one way. You could also go to my link tree, which is linktr.ee/John Thomas PA. That takes you to all of my my social media accounts. Actually, if you see one of my signs and scan it, it actually goes to my link tree. That was a people tend to go to a website once, but if they go to your social media and like it, then they see that day after day after day. So if you check out my link tree, or if you go to my website, my social media buttons are in the top right hand corner there. Like my social media, because that's where I would really like you to see me, because we're not being covered by the media. So anytime you see anything on social media from the campaign and you share it out, that is how we get our word out there. It's not going to be MSNBC is not interviewing me anytime soon. So if we want to get the word out, it has to be our grassroots level people who are out there doing that. So that would be a great way to help me. There's also a donation link on there. I know Pennsylvanians are struggling right now with the economy the way it is, but if you can't afford to throw a couple dollars at it, then you can go to that site that just popped up on your screen. Look at the magic of the internet. How about that? So there's that. But one thing that I do want to stress is that I recognize that short of a miracle, a libertarian is not going to win this race. But that doesn't mean you should not vote libertarian, because you don't need to win as a third party candidate to make a difference. I always go back to 1992. I was 15 that year. I was 14. And that was the year that I first started getting interested in politics. And we had Ross Perot running against Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. And Ross Perot was really focused on one thing only, and that was balancing the federal budget. And he would come on TV, he'd have his half-hour infomercials where he held up like his homemade poster board charts of the budget deficit, and he would just harp on and on about the budget deficit. And people thought he was crazy because we just had 12 years of small government Republicans, and the budget deficit just grew. This guy was crazy to think we were ever going to balance the budget deficit. He was crazy to think people cared about the balancing the budget at that point. So he ran. He spent millions and millions of dollars on this campaign, and he ended up getting 19% of the vote. 19% of the vote is not enough to win. So that was the end of the story, you would think, but it wasn't. Because what happened 2 years after that is the Republicans put a balanced budget into their contract with America. They were saying, if you vote for us, we're going to balance the budget. This was no longer a fringe idea. It was brought into the mainstream because 19% of the voters had the courage to vote third party. You know what happened 2 years after that? Democrat Bill Clinton signed a balanced budget into law. Why did that happen? Because 19% of voters had the courage to vote third party. So if you vote for me, I'm not guaranteeing victory, but I am saying that you're putting yourself in a position to do nothing less than to change the course of history by reshaping what the conversation in Pennsylvania looks like.
Amen to that. That's a great ending. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you. It was a pleasure being here. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for coming on the Liberty Speaks podcast. We wish you all the best of luck in your campaign and your future pathway as a beacon for liberty. Thank you so much.
Thank you.